everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there with you today. My dad came in from Virginia, and I haven't seen him in a long time. So I made arrangements with Dr. Menon to do the presentation via video. Since the last time I saw you guys, I defended my prospectus, and I passed. So I have joined the ABD ranks with the rest of you. Woo-hoo. And since then, I have been working on my introduction. One thing about the proposal defense, as you know, they change a lot of things before you get out of there. And then I did not leave unscathed. We decided as a group that I am going to chop one of my chapters, what I thought might be one of the most important, the Play Like a Girl chapter. But what we're going to do is incorporate that theme throughout the rest. We're going to cut it as a chapter and reincorporate it as a theme throughout. But they thought that maybe I would have to use some different methodology and really dig into sports psychology to answer some of the questions I was asking there. So we're chopping that chapter, and we're going to incorporate that back in, which removes a chapter from my plate. It'll expand the other chapters a bit, but it's allowing me to restructure my timeline. It gives me a little bit more room. Okay, so the tentative title that I've come up with, and I'm liking it. It's Loving a Game That Doesn't Love You Back, Exploring Major League Baseball's Complicated Relationship with Women and the Cultural Consequences. So for the introductory chapter, it's pretty standard stuff, right? I'm going to do an introduction and some background, a statement of key research questions, review of literature. I spent a lot of time on that in my proposal, and they were happy. I need some tweaking, but they were happy with the content there. The theoretical framework I'm using is going to be heavily feminist theory, of course. But and I'm going to be looking at people like Judith Butler, Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins. But I'm also going to use a Marxist framework to examine spectacle, commercialization, fandom, and the way that we commodify athletes, that kind of thing. And I'm also going to be looking at the Frankfurt School, Adorno and Horkheimer. Adorno really did not like sports at all. He thought that sport itself is not play but ritual in which the subjected celebrate their subjection and therefore demonstrate the role sports plays in developing an ideology which favors the existing power structures. He was not a fan. To say the least. I'm going to be using a mixed methodology, a combination of interviews, direct observation, case study, text analysis, and visual ethnography when we talk about several different things. We nixed the interview with the friend that I grew up with. As Lauren has pointed out as well, what makes her special, and I could still argue that she could throw 70 miles an hour at 13 underhand, and I think that makes her special, but that would have been more on the lines of the playing like a girl thing, so I can understand pulling her out of there. I'm still working towards getting Gina Davis and Tom Brenneman for interviews. Tom Brenneman is a broadcaster for the Cincinnati Reds. His dad was a broadcaster for years and years and years, so he's kind of a legacy. But I was watching a game last season, and he went off on this tangent about how many very knowledgeable women there are that watch the sport, that love the sport, and how he looks forward to the day that women are integrated into the game. And I thought that he has a unique position, not only being a legacy of broadcasting, but being a broadcaster himself. He knows the game, and to have that sort of very progressive attitude, I think he'd be a really useful person to speak to. My direct observation case study, I'm going to be going to the Reds. They're having a night of their own, which is scheduled in August. There's a meet and greet, there's batting practice, but it's a women's event, and I want to see how they handle that because from all of my research, it does not look great. A lot of teams are not doing a great job with integrating women into their fan caches. Okay, so my introduction, so we're going to have all of that stuff. And then the tentative chapter breakdown. So, chapter 1 is going to be a history chapter, basically. How did we get here? How did we get to the context and the cultural situation where we are? Why aren't women playing baseball professionally right now? There's been a lot of women who have tried. There have been a lot of women who have made it pretty far. In 1952, though, the commissioner of baseball banned women from being signed, saying that he didn't want them used as spectacles or a promotion. And that wasn't overturned until the 1990s. So that's one reason women haven't played. But since 2006, there's been inclusive language in Major League Baseball's rules that would allow for a female player, yet we still don't have her. There have been women who have reached fairly high in the ranks of umpiring, but never on the major league level. And there have been some women who threw batting practice for the major league teams. That was a first. But we still haven't had a coach of a major league baseball team that was female. So we're going to talk about all of those things. We can talk about the women that played in the Negro Leagues, which really is more about the inclusiveness of the Negro Leagues than it is them being, unique or anything like that. They allowed a lot of different kinds of people to play in the Negro Leagues. But there's a long history of women, from pitchers to first basemen, umpires, owners, writers, that kind of thing. So the writers become important in chapter 2. And in the style of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, it's famous canon in feminist theory. She talks about Shakespeare's sister Judith, and basically how she could have been the greatest writer ever, but we would never have known because she, A, wasn't a man, and B, wouldn't have had the means to have a room of her own to write, the independence to do that. And as such, a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction, is the quote from Woolf. But it's the idea that the only way women have had power in many situations throughout history has been through writing. And this has also been the case with baseball, because the only way women have been able to insert themselves in the game is through writing themselves into it. In some cases, it's nonfiction. We've had sports writers, we've had all of those kinds of things, and statisticians and the Seymours, that's a whole other story. But then we also have women who are writing novels and putting themselves as the first Major League Baseball player. There was one that came out as recently as last year, Throw Like a Woman by Susan Patrone. And in the book, she's the first female MLB player, and she is pitching relief for the Indians. And I mean, it's an interesting story, but the only way women have been able to get into the game has been through writing themselves in. So we're going to spend a chapter looking at the women writing themselves into the game. Then chapter 3 will probably be the most fun chapter. It's female fans and marketing gone wrong. So one example that I'm going to talk about is through football, because there hasn't been a whole lot of outreach to women in baseball yet. And some of the other leagues are trying things, but they are doing even worse than the baseball teams are. For example, in 2015, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are an NFL football team, launched a new campaign to entice fans. It was called Red. They wanted to reinvent the female fan experience. And the problem was, it sounds cool, right? But the problem was it had really little to do with the game of football. Instead of focusing on the game, Red offered female fans of the team sessions on fashion-forward team apparel, inventive culinary creations, a Pinterest board featuring 100 recipes for game day, and things, lifestyle tips for tailgating hostesses. And it assumes that there are no women that care about the game, or the women that do care about the game only care about it because of the players or because of the people that they are in relationships with. They care about the teams. And that's just not true. There's lots of women who like sport for sport's sake. And with this chapter, I want to look at why Major League doesn't even want to acknowledge women as fans. We have a lot of money to spend. Y'all know me. Do I look like a pink jersey kind of girl? And if I wanted to go buy a jersey, I could either buy a men's jersey or I could buy a pink jersey. And they're missing a huge segment of the market there. It's not only bad for business, it's bad for their pockets, and it's bad for the fans. And I have a lot of other things to say, but that's the general gist of it. The last chapter, like I said, was going to be the Play Like a Girl, gender and sports stuff, but that's going to be more integrated into the other chapters. We're going to distribute that. We're going to have to talk about Title IX and Little League Baseball and the effects that have been there. For example, Little League Baseball was sued, and they lost the gender discrimination suit. And in 1974, they were forced to change their charter, their rules. And that did two things. One, it allowed girls to play baseball, and it also founded Little League Softball. And in the 44 years since the rule change, think about the Little League World Series, right? It's the penultimate, it's the thing that you try to get to. More than 10,000 boys have participated in the Little League World Series since 1974. 15 girls have participated. And of those 15 girls, 5 of them have been from America, have been from United States teams. So in 44 years, we've been able to find 5 girls that have made it to the Little League World Series, and 10,000 boys. So a lot to talk about there. In general, so one thing I want to cover before I let you guys go. I know it sounds like my project is just about the exclusion of women from baseball, and that's not quite it. And I do want to talk about the exclusion of women, but it's more about the relationship there, right? It's more than just the exclusion of women. It's about the construction of gendered identity in baseball. Basically a project undertaken to contain the feminine threat inherent in the game, right? Using this kind of framework, I think we can unify everything that I want to discuss better than just the idea of exclusion. As one of my professors said, exclusion is just bigotry, and bigotry is not interesting. It's the ignorance or intolerance that is just very complicated or requires much deep, nuanced explanation. But if we can connect the century-long shaping of baseball's character and identity as a national pastime and as a part of the American character, as a project of hiding, containing, and denying the ways in which the game was most compatible with the dominant social construction of femininity, it makes it more complicated and even dialectical. It gives us a lot more room to cover, a lot more ground to cover, and it puts a lot more meat on the bones, I think, than just talking about the exclusion of women, to bring in the socially constructed gendered identity of the game, which is definitely a huge point of it. Throw like a girl. So that's what I'm working on. That is, I've got so many sources already. And then after those chapters, I'll have a conclusion. I've got almost 100 sources on my list so far. My schedule, I'm trying to finish the introduction by the end of by April 10th, so I'm working on it. I got about a week. And then produce chapter 1 by mid-May, produce chapter 2 by mid-July, produce chapter 3 by mid-September, and then do my conclusion by the end of January, or by the end of December, which will give me January, February, and March to do editing and revisions. I want to give myself as much time there as I can. So I think that's everything. I am in process of working through my introduction. Trying to see if there's anything else I should bring up. I am going to talk some about other sports because it's relevant, but mostly going to be about baseball because that's the focus. I chose baseball not just because it's the thing that I know or the sport that I care about, but because we do identify it so heavily with America and American culture. I could have talked about football, but it doesn't have as lengthy of a history in American culture. And it doesn't have the same kind of connotation of being America's game, of being America's pastime, of being America's sport. Some people would argue that it's becoming America's sport, that it's becoming more heavily watched, but it still doesn't have the historical foundation of being America's game like baseball does. And it hasn't been integrated into our language the same kind of way. Baseball just holds a unique position in American culture when it comes to the role of sport. So that's it. Have a good rest of your class. I'm looking forward to your comments. Feel free to give Jamie some notes, or feel free to email me if you have some thoughts. I would appreciate that as well. See you guys later. Bye.